Welcome to CTV's Capital Dispatch with Rachel Aiello.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the final Capital Dispatch of the season. So the House of Commons and then the Senate rose this week. That means Parliament now stands adjourned until September. So let's just walk through what happened in this final week, what bills passed, and what is kind of left to languish. So it's been pretty common over the last number of years for the House of Commons to agree to adjourn a couple days early to get back to their ridings, go to high school graduations, things like that. Over the last few rises, though, the Conservatives have put forward pushes to try to keep MPs around, either like a filibuster or some sort of measure. We did see, I'd say, a lighter version of that this go around. The Conservatives focused their efforts to keep MPs working, specifically at committees. They brought forward a series of proposals to try to have House of Commons committees meet at least 5 times over the summer. Ultimately, though, that push was unsuccessful, and all parties agreed on Wednesday to get out of town. They did that after agreeing to finalize a last couple pieces of legislation. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, Government House Leader Steve McKinnon said that they've passed 15 bills in 14 weeks. So for them, they're chalking that up to a successful, productive session. Obviously, though, the Conservatives and other parties have questioned some of the bills left behind. So they left and kind of put all the bills in the Senate's hands, and they finished up their work on Thursday. So in terms of what passed, we're looking at the budget bill, which was for sure the biggest one they had to get passed, the fall economic statement legislation, finally, Bill C-70, which has to do with foreign interference in the foreign agent registry. There was like some last minute suggestions of amendments in the Senate, but ultimately that piece of legislation has passed. That was one all parties were pushing to get in place in time for the next election in light of what we've been talking about in regards to foreign interference. They've also passed the anti-scab legislation. So that's the one about scab workers in strikes. They passed a bill about sustainable development and a series of other more financial pieces of legislation that are kind of required to keep the bells and whistles of government rolling. So those are kind of the highlights in terms of what passed recently. It's also worth noting, though, a number of pretty big bills have been kind of left to languish over the summer. With Parliament not sitting, that means these pieces of legislation are not going to be further debated or studied until September. Among them are the pharmacare legislation, which has kind of raised some eyebrows from advocates. So that bill is the one that is proposing that interim phase of pharmacare, looking at diabetes and contraceptive coverage. Bill C-63, which is the online harms legislation. This is a bill that the government is like so far blown past their deadline in terms of tabling and passing. Pretty contentious. So that one wasn't going to be one they all agreed to fast track, but that one is still left in the House, needing all those protections for some of the hate and harmful content online. Those regulations are still far away from becoming reality. And then Bill C-65, which is the electoral reform bill. So this is the piece of legislation where the government is proposing a bunch of new measures to improve accessibility when it comes to voting. But this is also the one where they've snuck in that measure that would essentially protect a bunch of MPs' pensions by putting off the next federal vote by a week. We've heard from a bunch of parties that they are going to be looking to amending that bill to wipe out what they're calling a pension protection provision. So that'll be something to watch when the House returns in the fall. So this week is always kind of like that last jam push to get things through before they head out. And it's always a question now of what happens over the summer. If they return to the House as it is, then they'll be able to pick back up on these bills. But there is always the potential that the Prime Minister could look to refocus, reshuffle, and prorogue. And if he was to do that, then they would be basically going back to the drawing board on a lot of their legislation. So that's why it's so key to kind of keep an eye on what moved and what didn't before they get out of town.
Are you personally satisfied with the way that your party is going right now?
No, I'm not. But I mean, the political tide goes in, the political tide goes out. That's the reality, you know. So we're swimming into the tide. It's tough. No good deed goes unpunished. We have to be resolute. We have to have faith in the constituents. We have to have faith in what we're doing, and we do.
So that was Liberal MP Sean Casey. He was speaking to reporters on his way into the final Liberal caucus meeting of the spring sitting. And this is my quote of the week because I think of all the MPs we asked to kind of comment on how they're feeling about the Liberals standing in the polls, what they're facing when they go back to the doorsteps. Mr. Casey was for sure the most frank. Here he's talking about, it's not a happy time, kind of attributing that to Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre and the way his caucus is acting on the Hill, and suggesting that the electorate is not punishing him, in his words, for their bad behavior. But then he's acknowledging as well, clearly everything the government is trying to throw at the wall, this, Gen Z focused budget, other things are not resonating with Canadians. So we asked him, he seemed a bit resolute, but largely what he's saying is no, he just knows the work that has to be done. He's been an MP for quite some time, and he doesn't know any other way to connect with his constituents other than head to their doorsteps and hear what they have to say. And then in that moment, try to share the message of what the Liberal Party is doing. This is my quote because I think it's also a good kind of starting point to talk about what happens now. So Parliament has risen for the summer, but politics absolutely does not stop. What we learned this week is where the parties are going to be going with their strategies on the summer tour. So we heard from a bunch of Liberal MPs who are basically trying to one-on-one connect with their constituents, hear their concerns, say they're not really looking at the polls. Whether I buy that or not is another question. Just knowing that this is really going to be a key time for them to try to turn things around. The government has been, 15 to 20 points down on the Conservatives for quite some time now. And then you look at what the Conservatives are going to be doing. So Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre launched his summer barbecue circuit tour in Quebec this week. He's actually right now driving an RV across the country, at least in Quebec, with his family. We'll be watching to see if that's a strategy. If he takes this van that's been wrapped with his face on it across the country, or if this is just a targeting of Quebec right off the top. But an interesting strategy. He's doing like campaign style events, definitely bringing his family along with him. You're seeing lots of photo ops of that already. So I'll be curious to see what the Prime Minister does to contrast that over the summer, but clearly a deliberate kickoff for the Conservatives who have been targeting Quebec since Poilievre became leader, and really hitting the ground running on their efforts to continue to shore up support across the country. That is really what the summer is about. You go to these barbecues, you talk to people, you try to see them where they're at. You get to meet the Prime Minister or Poilievre or Jagmeet Singh and have those one-on-one conversations. And sometimes that's where the connection can be made. So we'll see what comes from all of these various efforts when we're looking at what the polling starts to shape up like in the summer and into the fall. In terms of what I'm watching next week, there is one thing, but I also want to talk about, because this is the last one of the season, what I'm watching over the next couple of months. So what I'm watching next week, which is what I think every political observer is watching next week, is that federal by-election in Toronto St. Paul's. This is the race seeing a Liberal stronghold kind of put to the test. A lot of pundits have opined, and MPs as well. They're very closely watching what happens in this federal by-election, because it could be a referendum on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. There have been all of these pushes and suggestions that he should go, and whether or not it's time. And what is being said is that the outcome of this by-election could really, maybe not dictate that, but certainly have a say. So it's a Liberal stronghold. The Liberals have held this riding in downtown Toronto for over 3 decades. So while I do think they are likely to hold it, if they slide in the percentage of the vote they have by a big enough margin, and the Conservatives kind of come up, I think it's going to open up those questions for the Prime Minister of whether he is still able to carry the Liberal brand and have electoral success. On the contrary, though, if the Liberals really pull this off in a strong enough way, it could kind of quiet some of the mumblings we've been hearing about the Prime Minister's leadership. He continues to say he's determined to fight Poilievre in the next election, and he's still selling his cabinet and his caucus on that message. So that is why that by-election next week is going to be so important to watch. But then just to take a step back, as we are taking a pause on Capital Dispatch for the summer, clearly political news is going to keep happening. There'll be ramifications from this by-election, potential other big storylines. So definitely keep an eye on all CTV News platforms for the latest political coverage that I and my colleagues will be bringing you. And lastly, I just want to say thank you. I've had so much fun doing these videos, getting to kind of talk about sometimes the more procedural, nerdy things on the Hill, help demystify them, and hopefully help you understand them a bit better. I've been really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to getting back to covering the latest on Parliament Hill when they all come back in September. Until then, I hope you have a lovely summer. I hope you have some fun in the sun. And find a good balance of keeping up to date on what's going on in politics and also spending some time with the people you care about the most. Thank you so much.